Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 14th of June, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Where do we start? Syria.
Yeah, well, we're starting with the OPCW, the Organisation for Prevention of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which they say that their fact-finding mission to Syria has confirmed in a report that sarin was very likely used as a chemical weapon in the south of in the southern Syria, anyway, on the 24th of March 2017. They also concluded that chlorine was very likely used as a chemical weapon at the hospital close by the other event and surrounding areas on the 25th of March 2017. The conclusions for the 24th and the 25th incidents, they say, are based on separate witness testimony, epidemiological analysis and environmental samples, the collection of information and material, interviewing witnesses, as well as analysis of samples required a longer period of time to draw conclusions. The fact-finding missions report on these incidents has been shared with states parties to the Chemical Weapons Convention. The report was also transmitted to the UN Security Council through the UN General Secretary. Now, that's what they say. Here's what Alistair Burt says. He, of course, is International Development Minister. That date on that is incorrect. It says, this is confirmation of a spate of chemical attacks in the town in just 1 week. The OPCW having previously confirmed that a sarin attack took place on the 30th of March 2017. Well, that's what he says. Let's look at what ex-ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, had to say. Here we go again. Another report by the OPCW alleging the use of chemical weapons. As with the previous recent instances, Khan Sheikhun, for example, the inspectors did not actually visit the site for security reasons, while at the same time they were happy to take on trust samples from the same jihadis that they could not trust with their own safety. This is documented in the actual report, and of course no one will bother to read, available on the OPCW website. Peter Ford goes on to say, the samples were provided by an NGO, described inaccurately but typically in this carefully slanted report as the Syrian Civil Defence, our old friends the White Helmets. For any reader with any forensic training whatever, or even just a sceptical mind, the report is riven with inconsistencies and significant omissions. No biological samples were provided, for example. Hospital recordings are missing. Witness descriptions of the alleged bombs were inconsistent. For some they were barrels, for others canisters. That's just based on a 5-minute quick read. It is another shoddy report with a nail in the coffin of the credibility of the OPCW and the United Nations system. It augurs badly for the awaited report on the Douma incident. The march of folly towards the precipice of Douma 2.0 goes on, helped by the UN system. So that is Peter Ford's response to this. But let's get back to Alistair Burt for a second, because he went on to say the international community should come together and strengthen the OPCW's capability to prevent any further use of chemical weapons, including by attributing responsibility for these heinous crimes. Well, of course, what's he doing? He is echoing Theresa May's comments from the weekend at the G7 when she said, and today G7 leaders have agreed to establish a new rapid response mechanism. And of course, the two key points of this were coordinated attribution of hostile activity and joint work to assert a common narrative and response. But what Theresa May also said during that briefing was that we've agreed we must maintain the global norm against the use of chemical weapons. We've agreed to strengthen the ability of the OPCW to attribute responsibility for chemical weapons attacks. So where are we at, Brian? We're at the point where the OPCW is producing reports based on based on so-called evidence, having never actually attended the scene, never gathered any evidence of their own. They're relying on the White Helmets and jihadis to gather the evidence for them. They produce a report which the British government is delighted to see. Then in the meantime, Theresa May is calling for greater ability of the OPCW to attribute responsibility on the basis of zero evidence.
We're in the post-truth era, Mike, is where we are, and I think we're seeing this very, very easily now. So that's the policy, the common narrative. Never mind what the truth is, as long as the leaders of we'll say the European Union nations are all working together. Whatever is said is the common line, and everybody's got to stick to it. I often say this, you'll have to put up with my age. This just takes me back to what we were told was the big problem behind the Iron Curtain, that those nasty East Germans ran their country where free speech was suppressed, and whatever the political party said was the truth, the same in the Soviet Union. And now we see Theresa May's Conservatives echoing exactly the same policy. So we're in the post-truth era. We're working to a common narrative, and that means that the Western states can simply point a finger, accuse another nation state or a leader of using chemical weapons, for example, and that becomes the truth because they all agree. And the other thing we need to remember is that if the government's line in UK is now this common narrative, that will be the line of the British Broadcasting Company, because the BBC is a propaganda machine. If the government says that's our line, that's what £3.74 billion of BBC propaganda machine is going to talk about. So very dangerous times, Mike. And I'll just end by saying a little bit later, we're going to be talking about the removal of information from the internet. So the BBC removing news reports it's already made in order to facilitate government policy. Very dangerous. If people are listening in from overseas, then be under no illusions that the United Kingdom, under the guardianship of Theresa May, is rapidly now descending into a dictatorship. Well, let's look at another conundrum, and that is the defence industry and Rolls-Royce. We picked it up here on the BBC. Always a good place to start to see what the common narrative is from the government. And it's warning here that there's going to be big job losses at Rolls-Royce, 4,600 job cuts. We think there's going to be a lot more. But we're first of all going to say, well, the BBC's reported this today. This was the UK column on the 6th of June, major Rolls-Royce job cuts as executives slashed. What we can tell you about these cuts is that Rolls-Royce put in a particularly vicious team to go through particularly senior management to see who could be cut out. They allowed that team to produce the results, so hundreds, thousands of people to lose their jobs. And the next thing that the very senior Rolls-Royce management did is summoned some key people who had been leading those teams to cut jobs and said, you're going to lose your jobs as well. So some deep unease within Rolls-Royce, and we're pretty confident that a lot more jobs are going to be cut.
When you start cutting management and restructuring in this way, seems to me is what happens when you're preparing for some kind of acquisition.
Well, that's where we're headed to, Mike. It's very interesting that they say they can't make a profit on engines, so part of their prime business is to deliver aero engines. Rolls-Royce saying, well, we do make these engines, but we're losing money on each of them. So to solve that problem, we're going to cut management posts. Now, I don't know what the relative value in management salaries versus engine sales is, but I think probably the engine sales leaves management salaries in the dust. So I think something else is going on. Let's have a look at what Warren East said. He's the chief executive. He said, we have too complex a management and support organisation, and we need to simplify that so that we can remain competitive. We've heard the same language with the British car industry, Mike. When Leyland was in trouble, it was always, well, we're going to cut it, we're going to slim it down so that it's going to become competitive. But of course, what were they actually doing? They were siphoning out technology. They were removing the experienced managers and engineers. What was actually happening was the company was being collapsed. Well, Mr. Warren went on. He didn't say all of this directly. Some of this has been attributed to spokespersons for Rolls-Royce, but we'll bring it up on screen. He's ultimately responsible for it. We will cut 4,600 jobs over the next 2 years as part of a major reorganisation to be achieved by 2020. That is crucial to shareholders because it offers a measure of Rolls-Royce delivering on its Jam Tomorrow promise of turning its increasing sales of engines, on which the company loses money, into profitable service and maintenance activities in a few years' time. Are they sort of saying, Mike, they're actually not going to build anything, they're just going to provide the servicing and maintenance? It's a job to know, isn't it, from that language? But we'll come back to what UK columnists said previously, because we'd taken some advice from David Ellis, Chief Executive of Strategic Defence Initiatives. He was warning about these cuts at Rolls-Royce several months ago. But one of the things he is pointing out is that he's pretty sure that Rolls-Royce is being lined up for a takeover, probably a hostile takeover. Lockheed Martin is probably lead for that. But what is absolutely fascinating is that he's reporting that there's Chinese interests hovering in the wings for the engine technology. So those naughty Chinese that are building military bases on islands in the South China Seas, they're our enemy apparently, according to Theresa May and the Conservative government. We're sending our warship in order to stop their dastardly activities.
Warship,
yes.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, it looks as though we're very happy to give away not only civilian nuclear technology in UK, but now it looks as though Rolls-Royce is being lined up. And anybody there who's there in the Midlands, because of course the Midlands is going to take the bulk of these cuts in the first round at least, we saw that the car industry first of all had that technology sucked out of it by deals with Honda, for example, and later on with BMW. I think there's parallels, Mike.
In the meantime, the Financial Times reporting that Brussels plans to block US and UK companies from taking part in defence procurement programs and so on. I've seen Veterans for Britain commenting on this article today, saying that it's really a bit of obfuscation. But of course, we can't really pay not very much attention to these types of headlines at the moment, because of course these stories are being pushed out from the European Union and other interests in the middle of what is at least some kind of negotiation over Britain's future relationship with the European Union. So you've got to ask how many of these headlines are simply positioning for negotiation, and how many of them are there to try to influence public opinion in the UK with a view to getting a second referendum going later on. And so I think we can't really pay too much heed to these types of reports at the moment. But Arron Banks obviously has been in the news over the last couple of weeks because of the story that was broken by The Guardian and the Sunday Times on allegations of Russian money being used to support the Brexit campaign. It seems that a certain EU representative has tweeted something out, including Arron Banks in his comments about the pro-Brexit people, and suggesting that Arron Banks had been receiving support from the Russians, and he has decided to take legal action on it. So this is Guy, I can't remember how to pronounce his second name. Doesn't matter.
I'm afraid I can't help you on that one, even though we were discussing it just
before the programme, yes. So have a look at, if you freeze the frame, you'll see who I'm talking about. But it's interesting that he's decided to take legal action. He hasn't decided to take legal action yet against anybody in the House of Commons, of course, in the relevant select committee, which he can't do. But this is just such a ridiculous situation, Brian.
Guy Verhofstadt.
That's right.
Guy Verhofstadt is the man we're talking about. Perhaps we should also add that what this is raising is the European Union is saying that anybody who was involved in campaigning for Brexit is not only a right-wing extremist, but they were actually being helped by the Russians themselves. So we've got more of this rhetoric. If you don't agree with what the government did over the European Union, and you were one of those 17.4 million people who voted out, then according to the European Union, you were effectively working with the Russians.
Well, we've got to attribute the credit for this to the right place. It was the Guardian and the Times that broke this story. So you know, they claim that they have evidence that Aaron Banks lied about the number of times he met the Russians, and they're drawing certain conclusions about that. And the EU are, as you say, then jumping on that and making hay while the sun shines, as the saying goes. But you know, we watch this story with interest, but I don't see that it has any more legs than the Russiagate scandal, so-called, in the United States.
Yeah.
Right, quick advertisement now. Reverend Andrew Ashdown, who's been on this programme, there he is standing beside Vanessa Bailey, will be speaking in the Rye Bakery in Frome on Friday. That's next Friday, the 22nd of June, 6 p.m. I'm going to say I'd like to encourage everybody that can get along to that to come along and support Andrew, because he is unbelievably brave in the sense that he is coming under huge pressure, not only from the mainstream media over his stand that he's taking on Syria, but also from the Church of England. And he does need support. So if you are able to get along to that, Frome Stop War is promoting that event on Friday, the 22nd. Please get along to it.
So the Church of England might not happy with somebody giving an alternative view of what's going on in Syria?
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay, now let's get back to China for a second. Wall Street Journal here saying a headline is "A chip in the windshield, China's surveillance state will soon track cars." So this is a fantastic article. They're saying that, sorry, just hold on while I catch up with myself. They're saying that national plan to electronically scan cars adds to the way Beijing can monitor its citizens, also including video cameras and facial recognition technology. China is establishing an electronic identification system to track cars nationwide, according to records and people briefed on the matter, adding to a growing array of surveillance tools that the government uses to monitor its citizens. Under the plan being rolled out on 1st of July, a radio frequency identification chip for vehicle tracking will be installed on cars when they're registered, and so it goes on. And I just wanted to say the hypocrisy here, staggering, because of course the EU has had a requirement for car manufacturers to maintain a location for tracking devices in cars for probably 20 years now. It's been a legal requirement for manufacturers to do this. Unfortunately, up until recently, the technology hasn't really been there. But here's a Telegraph from last year saying that all cars must have tracking devices to cut road deaths, says EU, and that's supposed to be taking place by this year, that these are being installed automatically. So the Chinese not exactly in the lead on this, and for, you know, okay, it's a US newspaper, but the United States isn't going to be too far behind with this, and certainly any coverage of this in the UK would be gross hypocrisy, bearing in mind that the UK is the most surveilled country on the planet.
Yeah, with more to come, Mike, because it's not just picking up your face by the odd TV camera in the streets. Every detail, including, we're coming on to it, your medical records is going to be hoovered up as part of this surveillance.
Absolutely. But it goes on. Foreign Policy magazine, in China's far west, companies cash in on surveillance program that targets Muslims. And what are they saying here? They're talking about the Xinjiang, if I've pronounced that right, Xinjiang province in the far west China, which is mostly a Muslim area. And Foreign Policy magazine saying China has created one of the world's most sophisticated and intrusive state surveillance systems to target the predominantly Muslim Uyghur ethnic minority, part of what Beijing calls an anti-terrorism campaign. The system includes mandatory facial recognition scans at gas stations and Wi-Fi sniffers that secretly collect data from network devices. What does the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act do in this country? I think it does exactly that type of thing. Anyway, it goes on. Over the past 2 years, the technology has helped authorities round up an estimated hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and other Muslims and lock them up in clandestine camps that China calls re-education centers. Well, again, gross hypocrisy here, because, of course, they're only telling half the story. They're saying that China is calling this an anti-terrorism campaign, and no matter what you think about the surveillance aspect of that, that's exactly what it is, because, of course, the West is in there trying to foment problems in this Western Chinese province with the Uyghur Muslims in the same way that they've tried to foment problems in the Middle East.
Yeah.
You know, we've heard of white helmet connections here and so on. So there is a Western influenced program going on to try to stoke up tensions in this part of China, and the Chinese are reacting to it. But again, we have this gross hypocrisy over the levels of surveillance going on in one country when we're doing exactly the same here.
Yeah. And I always come back, Mike, on the fact that with China, you know what you're getting in a way. You know what the government is, you know what the system. But of course, in UK and the Western democracies, supposed democracies, we have this veneer of respectability, the power of the law, of justice.
Yes.
That's what makes it particularly sickening for UK, I think.
Yes. Now, in a second, Brian is going to come on to the issue of data and youth. But let's look at this. This is an NSPCC report being commented on by The Telegraph. Facebook exposes British children to violence and bullying. Major NSPCC study finds. And they say Facebook is guilty of allowing British children to be exposed to violence and bullying. According to an analysis of unsafe networking and gaming sites, a third of children aged 11 to 18 have also been exposed to self-harming or suicide material on Facebook, the world's biggest social network, according to research by NSPCC. The children's charity has published a breakdown of 14 sites, apps and games where children are likely to see inappropriate content such as violence, hatred, sex, suicide, self-harm, bullying, drugs, alcohol, or illegal activity. Now, this is a complex issue because there is quite a big attack going on from various establishment directions on Facebook at the moment. And I believe that attack, Brian, is the main reason for that attack is because there's a recognition that stories, disinformation, as they call it, spreads far and wide on Facebook and Twitter in particular. Now, if we look at the internet, going back 10 years before Facebook existed, people were discussing issues on forums and so on, and these tended to be quite far-walled communities, shall we say. Information discussed on a particular forum platform didn't tend to spread terribly easily out to other forum platforms because people tended to stay on the one that they were on. Whereas Facebook, because it is so ubiquitous, information gets shared in a way that hasn't been seen before. And so there's an effort by the government to try to stoke up people's fears about data collection. These are justified fears about data collection on Facebook. But the aim of the game here is, because the government really doesn't care that Facebook is collecting data. After all, they encourage it. So if they're promoting a narrative which says that stokes up fears about that, then there must be some other reason. And the reason is because they want people to start feeling like they need to get back to this old model of the internet with far-walled communities where information doesn't spread so quickly. And so we're seeing this from The Guardian today. WhatsApp increasingly popular for sharing news. And what The Guardian is saying is that the Reuters Institute is reporting that the use of WhatsApp for news has almost tripled since 2014. They're saying the public is increasingly forgoing Facebook as a news source and using WhatsApp to share and discuss stories with friends and family. Consumers are being put off by what are being described as toxic debates and unreliable news. They're also finding that alternative networks offer more convenience, greater privacy, and less opportunity to be misunderstood. So privacy right at the heart of this. Well, I'm going to say that I think, you know, this is a dangerous path to go at this particular time. If we start sort of crawling back into our shells, as it were, and not sharing information, then this is a pretty dangerous way to go.
I think we've got to emphasise, we have said it from the outset, that people should be talking more, because if you get into this fear mentality and close down, it just makes it easier and easier for the state to dictate what you're doing, what you see. So we say, if you're, of course, being lawful and you're being reasonable, but you may still be challenging the government, then you should be aiming to push out as much information as possible to give the surveillance boys something to do. Well, I'm sorry to say I'm going to come back to the BBC again, but it's been interesting to see how they're working the news at the moment. So let's come back to that screenshot of the BBC's news page first thing this morning. This is the one that caught my eye. Immigration rules to be relaxed for NHS staff. And I thought how interesting this was, Mike, that we've got the very, very emotive subject of the NHS. Many people, of course, worried that the NHS is being collapsed, certainly being privatised, which is why we ran the recent Nottingham NHS event talking about these matters. But now we can only really save the NHS if we have people coming in from overseas. So it's just fascinating to see how the BBC does this. We have a nice graphic, and it shows the dark colour there is UK employed nationals. The slightly lighter bluey greeny colour is EU and European Economic Area. And then the light colour at the bottom is the rest of the world. So we have a nice graphic showing, well, of course, we only take a tiny proportion. So we can't train these people ourselves. We used to be sort of a first-rate nation. Now we're dropping down the scales. We can't really take young people and train them to have important professions. We need people to come in from overseas to save us. And the BBC really pumping this home. So what I was interested in was the way they tackled this, because if you look at their text, we see some interesting things. They say, according to think tank Global Future, 12.5% of NHS England staff are from overseas. This number rises to 45% in certain specialities, including paediatric cardiologists and neurosurgeons. So what a statement that nearly half the people were looking at neurosurgery. We've got to bring in from overseas because we've neglected our own young people so badly we can't train them. But note the comment is not from the NHS itself, it's not from the general public, it's not from the Minister of Health, it's from a think tank Global Future. So let's bring in the next one here. And what have we got? Well, we've got ALP. Minmet of Pressure Group Migration Watch said he accepted the change, but that it should not be the long-term solution. So we've got another pressure group, another think tank brought in giving the opinion. We're better bring in another one here just to show that this, of course, is not an accident by BBC. The last bit is perhaps this is a sign that Sajid Javid is willing to take a bolder and more flexible approach to immigration. Here's the politics really coming in now, and deliver the kind of system that Britain will need after we leave the EU. And that's from the director of the immigration think tank, British Future. So what the BBC is doing is, of course, undermining Brexit. We can't possibly survive after Brexit. We will need countries in other parts of the world to come and save us after Brexit. And the opinion put forward is nothing to do with the opinion of people in this country. It's to do with think tanks that are all, of course, paid by sources that want an opinion to come forward. So I'm going to encourage you to go and read that article on the BBC and just see how cleverly the BBC have cooked up the figures to give the, what's the phrase, the common narrative that, of course, the government really wants, which is we can't leave the European Union because if we do that, Britain is going to fall apart. And I'll bring in this one. The real message then is no point training people for key NHS jobs in UK.
Yeah, we just bring them from outside.
Yeah, we're just not bright enough. We can't manage anymore. Encourage people to have a look at this man's book, How to Dismantle the NHS in 10 Easy Steps. Yusuf El-Gingi, very good 65-page book, I think. And of course, the real BBC message is let's internationalise the NHS, which will give us greater profits after full privatisation. So on to the subject which you mentioned, Mike, and that's to do with data. Very interested to receive this letter from the NHS. See if I can blow it up on screen. The print's even a little bit small for us, but let's see what we can do. It said, "Dear Mr. Gerrish, we're writing to bring you up to date with recent changes in the way you can choose how the NHS and care organisation use your information." It said on the 25th of May 2018, a national data opt-out was introduced across England. The government has set out that by 2020, all health and care organisations must follow and apply your national data opt-out choice. And they quite rightly say that I've already said I want to opt out of a number of things. But what caught my eye in the letter was this bit here. I was just astonished to read this. It said if you had previously registered the opt-out that applied to NHS Digital on behalf of anyone else, such as any dependent children, we will have automatically changed their opt-out as well. And if they are now aged 13 or over, they will receive their own letter. So I phoned NHS Digital this morning to see whether they really considered that children were capable of making these decisions. They told me they were, but in any case, this has been approved in legislation. Before we get into this a little deeper, I'll say that this letter came with this leaflet, so everybody in the country can expect one of these. But here we have the NHS calmly saying that an NHS who received a letter talking about data privacy and what they should do about it, if the child didn't understand the letter, then the child of 13 years should phone NHS Digital to have a discussion with them about their data privacy needs. I was astonished, Mike.
So no role for parents in this?
No role for parents, and it's really saying that 13-year-olds are legally competent. I wonder if this is to help lower the age of consent. This is where I think it's going, so that you can give children vaccinations without parental consent. You allow them to deal and engage with the NHS. But the gentleman was kind enough to say, well, we're only following the law. And of course, he was right on this.
Well, he was, because
sorry,
yeah, because there's the Information Commissioner's Office guidelines on this, and what it says quite clearly is if you're relying on consent as your lawful basis for processing data when offering an online service directly to a child in the UK, only children aged 13 or over are able to provide their consent. So that's given by the Data Protection Act. But as a general point, Brian, if we go back to that Facebook article that I was talking about a minute ago, and remember what it said, Facebook is guilty of allowing British children to be exposed to violence and bullying, according to analysis by the NSPCC. So it's Facebook's responsibility to protect children that are using Facebook. There is no mention of parents in this.
No.
So Facebook has to act as the corporate parent. There's no parental responsibility in deciding what the appropriateness of any particular content is, and parents have no role to play.
And we can also add that, of course, NSPCC is brought in as the spokesperson, the body. Don't consult with the British public. They can't think for themselves. You should trust what the NSPCC has to say. So just as with those other think tanks, in participatory democracy, which is the model being brought in very strongly now across all three political parties in Britain, that means the individual's opinion simply doesn't count. You have to be a charity, a non-governmental organisation, a trust or a think tank in order to get a view put forward that the government may consider if they feel it's worthwhile.
Yeah, they'll only take so-called expert opinions.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, quick advertisement for Alternative View 9 DVD set, 14 DVDs, $59.99 on the UK Column website. That is a promotional price until they ship on the 1st of July. So it's a pre-order price at the moment. Please get yours if you'd like to. This is a fantastic set of presentations.
Some really incredible talks, and I have to say that Alex Thompson, who did one of these talks, absolutely fascinating and very, very good feedback. But in fact, all the speakers did extremely well, and people at the event were just full of praise. So if you weren't able to get there, you can listen and see those talks via the DVDs. Well, let's come back to this lady, Melanie Shaw. It's quite remarkable that things seem to be unfolding at the moment. We have been pointing out that Melanie has been unaware of her release date. Now, we've got some information which has come forward to us today, which said, in fact, she was aware of a release date, but we're now actually past that date. And we think a number of things are happening here because Melanie is past her release date. She's still held in prison. And what is happening in the background is that the so-called independent child sexual abuse inquiry is supposed to be taking evidence from people in the Nottingham area, but of course Melanie has disappeared in the prison. So this is the document, and it's a release date notification slip. It's dated the 30th of August 2017, and it has some extremely interesting information on it, because it basically says, well, first of all, it totted up the number of days that Melanie was due to serve. So she was given 3 months, 3 months and 9 months. But then they also pointed out that she'd spent 222 days on remand. That should have been deducted from her sentence, but you can see the boxes there, days spent in custody pending appeal. There's no manual completion of any more information, but highlighted there is a release date of the 2nd of June 2018. Now we're well past this, and we are increasingly worried about Melanie. It seems that she's getting very rough treatment in the prison. She's effectively now disorientated about why she is there. She's even been confused about what prison she's in. This appears to us to be deliberate, but we would like an explanation as to how this lady is being held past her release date with no paperwork that's been received by the people supporting her in a legal capacity, or it would appear Melanie herself. So we say, is it a coincidence that Melanie Shaw has been silenced as the government's abuse inquiry has gone to Nottingham? Personally, I don't think it is. But in all the material that's appearing on the web, they're encouraging you to go and look at that abuse inquiry website. I followed one of the links a couple of days ago, and I was astonished to see this. Now, I don't know what our viewers will make of this, but the caption is, "I will be heard," and I find this image very, very disturbing, and I would imagine, Mike, that somebody who suffered abuse would also find this image disturbing. For those listening in audio only, we're looking at the lower face, I think, of a black male, because there's definitely signs of some beard there, but we're looking at lips. And I've taken some advice on this image from a number of people who work in the child abuse field, and they are extremely disturbed by this image. I'm going to put a caption in here. Is the choice of this image an accident, or is this a signal that the inquiry itself is actually a scam? They're mocking the abuse victims. It's very nasty stuff. Here is the inquiry's own website, and highlighted on it is the fact that they are encouraging all people who've been abused to come forward for that Nottingham inquiry. But of course, Melanie and many other women can't come forward because they're still in prison.
Right, what's next? Oh,
sorry, yes, we'll just sum up on this. I'm sorry, I'd forgotten about this one. This is why we think Melanie Shaw's testimony is so special. She's got a photographic memory that includes the types of cars that members of staff were driving back in the very early 80s, and it also includes registration plate numbers. She described the abuse of herself, boys and girls, and the threats that those children had to remain silent. She also spoke of the murder of children, and she spoke of links to politicians. She talked about Jimmy Savile links, and she talks about links to other sadistic child abuse rings. So I think this is the reason that she is silenced in prison at the moment.
Well, we'll finish on this one, Brian, but Tommy Robinson has been getting a lot of publicity today because he's apparently been moved prison. Now, this is looking at Google search of Tommy Robinson, and we can see that he's being moved to HMP Leicester. Lots of people making lots of quite strong claims about what's going on there. We had Alex Jones, apparently in his pajamas and beard, getting up in the middle of the night to make an emergency broadcast on this, and so it went on. But the fundamental statistic that was being bandied about was that the prison that Tommy Robinson had been put into was 71% Muslim. And this was something that Alex Jones and a whole bunch of others pushed forward. Well, in fact, it's simply not the case. Looking at the report, sorry, I should have put the source for this, but it only took a couple of minutes to discover the latest Inspectorate of Prisons report on this, and they visited the prison only a few months ago, it's quite clear that 14% is the percentage of the Muslim population in this prison. Now, I'm not saying that it's a nice place to be. Looking at the actual report, it says HMP Leicester is a small and ageing city centre local prison that was first opened in 1828. The prison holds 308 prisoners at the time of our inspection, about 100 more than it was designed for, so it is overcrowded. Most people, they say, or most prisoners lived on one main wing. So anybody that says, oh, but Tommy's been put in a wing that was 70% Muslim, this isn't true. It's one main wing. We last inspected the prison in 2015 when we were highly critical of what was then a deteriorating establishment, failing to ensure outcomes were sufficiently good in any of our tests of a healthy prison. It's therefore pleasing to report that our findings at this inspection evidence significant improvement across many areas despite ongoing challenges, both operationally and environmentally. In 2015, we reported on a prison we considered unsafe. It remained the case that Leicester was still not safe enough, but it is right to acknowledge that the governor and his staff are showing considerable determination in trying to make the situation better. Good first night support, vital in dealing with what's generally short-term and transient population, is available but let down by weak induction arrangements. Recorded violence has fluctuated considerably since our last inspection but remained high and has risen further in 2017. About a fifth of violent incidents were judged to be serious, and increased assaults against staff were of added concern. Other relevant indicators such as the use of force, use of segregation, and use of special accommodation similarly remained high. So it's not a pleasant, I'm not saying for one second it's a nice place to be. It is an overcrowded prison, and of course under those circumstances, pressures build. But the key point is here that if we're going to report what's going on to people, then we've got to do it truthfully. And the 71% claim was just so far away from the truth that I find it really difficult to comprehend how this or why people were pursuing this particular narrative.
It's very difficult. I think a lot of it, Mike, is emotion, that the emotion is coming to the surface now as people begin to see what's happening in the country. But of course, we've had many people who have been absolutely beaten, if you like, by the British state and put in prisons or psychiatric units simply as a result of challenging the government. We've had an elderly veteran, Norman Scarf, who was put in psychiatric units, and he's been given a terrible time from the British government for challenging the government. We haven't seen mass demonstrations. We've had mothers who've fought for their children after they've been taken away. We haven't seen the mass demonstrations on the streets. So I think the problem is that the emotions now are coming very high, and really they came to the surface for that event. But if we're to do something about it, it's not what is happening to one person in this country, because this is now being unleashed on thousands of people, many of them a lot more vulnerable than Tommy Robinson. So my personal view on the matter is we need to get some focus back on what is really taking back in this country and not be distracted on one single issue, because it is much, much deeper than one issue or the simple topic of Asian abuse gangs. We need to start focusing on the people who control the child protection system, and that brings us straight back to the government itself. It brings us back to the government departments, local authorities, the police, and the so-called child protection charities like NSPCC and Barnardo's. That is what needs to happen. Otherwise, we're just going to get drawn into one area while the crimes of the state carry on.
That's it.
That's it. I'll stop there. Thank you very much to people who've recently made donations to the UK column. We do appreciate it when you make donations. We also appreciate the people who are subscribers As always, if you're not a subscriber, but you're now watching UK Column on a regular basis, please consider subscribing, because we can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.